Hi, hello, this is Amir, and I'd like to introduce you to my new vocabulary app called Tomato. I'm excited to share some of the early designs for this app and some of the successes and failures we've already had along the way. And you might be wondering why a vocabulary app would be called Tomato, and that's a great question. I promise I'll get to that very soon. But first, I want you to meet Kashif. Kashif is a young professional. He's very extremely busy with a hectic commute from the East Bay to San Francisco every weekday. He spends about 40 hours a week commuting. And he does work really hard, but likes to spend his weekends with friends and family. Definitely needs a break after that long work week. And along with his wife and daughter, he likes to travel to new places, preferably to places that his friends haven't been to. Speaking of his friends, he does miss his college buddies, and he's really curious about going back to grad school, but he only has about half a foot into that entire process. More than anything, when it comes to acquiring new vocabulary, what Kashif really appreciates is structured learning. He doesn't feel like he wants to take a half measure approach. He definitely likes to go all in and work really hard at something that is structured in a professional or academic way. So really, what this ends up meaning for him and his goals and what he's really looking for is he's actually looking for two things. The first thing Kashif needs to do with learning new vocabulary is to impress people. He's not really going to admit that to you straight up, but ultimately that's one of the things that is making him tick. The other part of what motivates him is his eagerness and desire to learn. He's a bit of an information sponge and likes to be pretty methodical about how he's approaching that learning. As far as impressing people is concerned, he has a couple of different sort of sub motivations there. He definitely feels like his career, could use a step up with but going back to grad school or doing some professional development courses, and wants to make sure that he can impress his coworkers and his superiors at work. But he also wants to make sure that he makes a good social impression amongst his friends. And even with this, it is something that is a part of structured learning for him. It's This could be either reviewing languages he already knows, or perhaps it could be memorizing or providing context to certain facts that he needs to share, but definitely making a social impression is important to him. Also included in that, of course, is hobbies like music, which he really appreciates studying theory for. Now, as far as learning is concerned, he definitely has, again, that real strong sort of inclination towards that structured learning. So he is considering using a tool that will supplement some grad school prep courses that he's considering. It doesn't have to be a grad school prep course for him. It could be anything at all. He could be taking an online class in photography, even. He likes to have that sort of structure and the ability to review what he's learning and provide context to what he's learning through an app. Otherwise, he would just use regular flashcards if he wasn't able to do that. But also another sort of real driving motivation for Kashif is definitely his sort of thirst for knowledge itself. So he wants to learn, not necessarily only for motivations that have to do with grad school, but again, this part sort of links up with his more social inclinations for what he might want to learn, like studying music theory or his new photography course that he might be taking. But there are certain obstacles that keep coming up for him throughout his efforts in terms of trying to acquire and retain new vocabulary. First of all, time always tends to become an issue. He is always stressed for time, being pulled between a very demanding professional career and a young new family. He also finds um, that concentration, that learning is effortful, and doesn't find it to be something he can do in any sort of not only unstructured way, but he definitely needs some sort of guidance and support while he's learning new vocabulary. And the part that he struggles with the most, perhaps, is focus. And he's quite proud of the fact that when he puts his mind to something, he definitely accomplishes it. but he wants to make sure that he also has maximizes and uses his time effectively. So he's looking for something here not only that can condense the amount of time that's required for study and review, but also to make sure that time is spent in the most efficient way possible. So he's checked out a few different apps and found some things that he loves in several apps. But some apps tend to be either uh, apps that might have a very sort of straightforward interface, even can be pretty distracting with too many features, too many things, and that might be going on. Or he's found that some apps are focused exclusively on language acquisition rather than studying some other domain or other subject. And he's found only a couple of apps that provide him with the ability to link with an official class that he's taking and then pull up information from either a class or a book. And there was a few apps that did that. I think he found this one in the center called Study Blue that actually had the ability to provide that context. So at the end of the day here, what Kashif needs is an app that's going to help him maintain that focus, condensing not only and compressing not only the time that's required to study, but maintaining that focus, but also something that is supplementing existing learning that he is already involved in, and an app that can receive greater context as well, because that again tends to be one of the major things that he finds to be effortful is that learning is being done without any given context. So this leads us to some core features for Tomahto that we designed for to sort really focus on Kashif's challenges in particular. One is a focus mode, which is what the app is named after, and this is the big reveal I promised I'd explain what the name was. It is named after the Pomodoro system, which is a studying method where one studies or concentrates for 25 minutes and there's a built-in 5-minute break. There's potential for gamification with this that would fit some of the research that we've done with this so far, but it's starting here with focus mode. This is the core component, one of the core components of the app. The second is to just find additional decks that already exist that might relate with a course, might relate with a book, that can be pulled up and retrieved. And finally, the ability to customize decks to provide more context and more substance, any definitions or any vocabulary that Kashif is picking up. So with this in mind, we sort of designed here a process for entering that focus mode once one opens the app, quickly seeing this happy path here in blue, which it seemed pretty logical and natural that if you end up at the main menu and all you have to do is select a deck, that it would be pretty intuitive that focus mode should automatically be on. And if you don't want it to be on, you can go into administrative settings and set that up. And that would definitely be, seems like it would be a very easy, straightforward way for users like Kashif to be able to quickly find what they are looking for. And secondly, another major component that was sort of designed and tested for here was the ability to enter that supplemented structured learning deck, which is simply the ability to call up a deck linked with a course or a book, as I said. And here as well, it seemed pretty straightforward that this is something that should belong in the administrative area, going simply from the main menu to the administrative area, selecting a deck and confirming it, which would then give one the option to either enter a session of study or to schedule one for the future. So it looks like some pretty straightforward stuff, and these early sketches and user flows lend themselves to very easy early initial prototyping with a few different versions of Tomahto that I came up with, starting with this process of simply signing up and going through an orientation process. These slides are moving from, these screens are moving from the top left to the right and then the second row. Obviously starting with a splash screen, which would then allow one to enter, the second row here, allow one to enter into an orientation mode, and then giving one an option to either sign in or sign up while going through orientation. And once that was complete, of course, you would get the ability to enter into the main menu, providing an easy sign up and orientation process that was to be tested shortly. The second portion, of course, was actually entering a focus session or a Pomodoro session within the app, which again, with based on the user flow, was designed to be on by default. So you simply click on either the deck or the tomato icon, which would allow you to enter into a focus session. And if you needed to toggle it off, you could click that tomato icon again and toggle that off. And finally, adding that sort of structured learning component, pretty straightforward idea. You click on the administrative menu, which is on the main menu, the bottom right. You then select Add New Deck and either enter a QR code or select from a list of decks to enter from, and you continue and simply add that process in. And finally, you can add the bottom right, click that plus sign, add a new word for more context and definition. Definitely something that Kashif had expressed, and even other users had expressed a strong sort of inclination towards and need for. So this, of course, lent itself to some pretty straightforward user testing. In terms of adding a new deck, that part was extremely straightforward, and no user deviated from the happy path at all. But there were some challenges with the rest of this, and frankly, some pretty serious challenges with several of these tasks. The first one, of course, was to simply create an account. And in terms of observations and feedback around this process, it was noted that users consistently skipped over the orientation. There was some conversation that was had about why they did that later on, which I'll point out in a moment. Simply, they were clicking through the sign up process instead of going through orientation. Second task was to enter a focus session of study, which again, every user took longer than expected to find the happy path. Every user ended up within administrative areas first before entering the deck, thinking they needed to turn the session on and off there. That was what ended up being intuitive. And finally, was the third task was to add a supplemental learning deck, which again, everyone found the happy path quickly, but some users commented saying that for such a fundamental component of this app, it should have felt more obvious and intuitive, which it did not. So this led to some redesign after this feedback. The initial prototype had this sign-on process, or this orientation process rather, which allowed one to sign up or sign in, or to move on to the next slide in orientation near the middle of the screen, whereas sign up and sign in were at the bottom of the screen where users are more likely to click. The redesigned prototype would have a splash screen itself that would allow one to go into sign up or sign in. And once sign up was selected, one would then go into an orientation. The initial prototype had it the other way around. You would have sign up or sign in after an orientation. And in this orientation, the controls were shifted around. So at the bottom of the screen is where you select to move on to the next slide. So you're getting a full proper orientation to the core components of the app, whereas you could also skip if you needed to, or just enter the app itself by clicking the middle of the bottom of the screen. The second component that was tested was entering a focus session. And as you can see, pretty straightforward. You simply click in on the active deck in the initial prototype, but every user found that they preferred clicking on administrative areas first. And then either they were looking for the ability to turn focus mode on and off. So we had to build in an ability to turn that focus mode on or off with the tomato turning red if focus mode was on. And finally, entering a structured learning session, what was found was that adding that deck, the original prototype, you basically went into the administrative area and selected add new deck. And whereas in the updated prototype, you had the ability to click on the plus sign in the bottom right of the screen, which would then give you options. And every user that tested this gave the same feedback that when they saw the plus sign, they thought both adding a new word and the deck would be there. This was simply redesigned to sort of correspond with that expectation. So the next steps here are really to continue with the design process. Well, the first thing that needs to be done is to add more of a gamification user flow for the Pomodoro tool in here. It's a tool at this point. It's not really gamified, but it definitely has the potential to be. The second part is to A/B test the layout of the menu itself. A lot of the redesign was based on where users were clicking, expecting certain things to be, and it's untested as of now whether that was because of the symbol or simply, or at least in part, because of the placement of that particular button. And finally, to deepen the structured learning supplements and sort of redesigning them to make that a little bit deeper in terms of how many elements are actually available in the prototype, and actually walking through actually adding something, not just mocking it up, having a little bit more detail in there. The key takeaways from this process for me as a designer were that I needed more detailed user flows and perhaps multiple iterations of user flows before I started my process of even sketching initial iterations. But then the second takeaway was that I definitely needed to sketch more and sketch often. I found that when it came to redesign, I didn't have many options to fall back on. I found that I had to start really doing detailed redesigns with no early sketches available, and actually had to sketch out and do another round that way. So more early sketching would definitely be an important takeaway for me. And finally, rinse and repeat. This was a very edifying process in terms of understanding how an app is designed, but also a very humbling one. When I first completed my first prototype, I was frankly a bit overconfident about how intuitive it would be to use, and definitely left me with a lot of food for thought to have users give feedback about it, which was the opposite of what I expected. And that's pretty much it for me. I hope you enjoyed this presentation about Tomato Tomato.